very, very small budget. It sounds like a lot of money, but it wasn't. And things like metal stairs with hardwood timbers because they don't swell. I mean, we were finding with the EAA stuff that hardwood timbers would be swelling about 14%. Typically they have about 10% moisture content, but they go up to 14% depending on the length of inundation, whereas pine would be up around 30%. And that's why I think it was swelled and buckled and cracked and carried on. So I think there are ways of designing for resilience and in terms of material choice. This is that first house that I showed, kind of the panorama of the upper floor there. And that's the floodline there. So we ended up raising this one right up, and that's what you get. This is on Graceville Avenue in Graceville. And again, this is sort of what we were faced with doing. And under the DA, we could have gone another metre higher, to be honest. But you end up with this divorced situation between the house and the backyard. So that the decision was made at the time to actually elevate the entire backyard, just so that the kids could actually play, have some land, like some grass to play on. This is sort of, again, a similar thing, but a much simpler plan because we were working with kind of an obvious idea. And this is sort of just some of the shots as we were actually doing it. So that's that one there. So that became that. Everything's marine ply, hardwood timbers, no cavity construction, and it's easily flushed out as well. So downstairs, again, all this can be pulled out. Last year, at the beginning of last year, remember we had that fake flood where everybody was like, oh no, it's going to happen again. These guys freaked out. A lot of my clients freaked out because they thought, oh, it's going to happen again. So we went around with 4 friends and basically within about half an hour pulled this entire kitchen out, had it upstairs, and thankfully nothing really kind of happened. But anyway, that's what that house ended up being. One Wally Street in West End, similar idea, jack the house up above the floodline, and then, yeah, so it was massive. We could have even gone another metre higher under the 9.5 metre rule, but for expense, it was, we actually did the sums on it, and it would have cost about another 90 grand, $80,000 to $90,000 to go an extra metre, just in block work and render and everything like that. So again, the plan forms about doors, resilient materials on the lower level, and this is what it sort of looks like. This one, this time, an additional complexity was that my clients wanted all the joinery up off the ground. So how do you do joinery up off the ground? It can easily be pulled out. So with a Corian bench on all things. So we had to work really closely with the guys that actually ended up building it, and they were all really good. Everybody really wants to work with stuff that can happen again. So it makes sense that you design things that can help people, not hinder them in these situations. So yeah, so this is sort of, again, all hardwood timbers and etc. Because of that, and the EAA work, the practice work, I had a friend who had previously been given a Churchill Fellowship, and she suggested to me that I should apply. And I don't know, I thought it was a bit of a junket idea, like we kind of get money to travel around the world. But then at the same time, I thought there were a lot of, I started to sort of think, well, actually, if I could learn about the broader picture of flood, because I'm getting asked as an architect to deal with a lot of the detail issues. So my clients are like, look, we want to design living environments that we can just flood out, and then we can go on and live after, etc., etc. We don't have to worry so much about our house. And I thought, well, surely back up the chain in terms of legislation and authority levels, etc., etc. If I could understand and even influence, perhaps, from this point back up the chain, or participate in thinking about that stuff anyway, and that's basically how I framed the Churchill my application to the Churchill Fellowship was that I wanted to go and interview people who knew a lot about the broader picture of this kind of work. And so that's what I ended up doing. So I went firstly to New Orleans, and this is the southern US, so Louisiana and Mississippi up here, and these spots are all the places that I visited. I'll show you images from each of these. And I was on a search for people of interest and case studies of interest as well. And so that's basically where I began. I met a guy called Wendell Q. Rowland. He was he's a Cajun man who is the head of one of the levee boards in this area, and he was actually the head of the levee board of the US at one point in his career. He seriously looks like a Hollywood movie star, right? He's got the best head of hair, and he can tax his people, but he's a levee builder. That's what he does, right? He builds levees. His levees don't fail. During Katrina, his levees protected the entire community. He can build them for a lot less than the Army Corps of Engineers. He's been doing it for 40 or 50 years. The Army Corps of Engineers basically build their levees for about $40 a cubic metre. He can build them for about $6 to $8 a cubic metre. But because he's not part of the Army Corps of Engineers, his levee system around his community is no longer accredited. So he's now having to tax his people to be able to build them higher. And so I met this really interesting guy who explained why New Orleans will always flood, and basically why the delta is effectively being destroyed by the fact that they are controlling the line of the Mississippi so much that it no longer has the ability to sort of disperse sediment across this particular area, which it had been doing for like 5,000 years or whatever. So they're losing an incredible amount, and this is why I took this photo, or actually put this photo in, because this is what it's looking like. So that's actually bad. The whole Gulf kind of community is actually slipping into the Gulf of Mexico. New Orleans is strategic because there's 14 or 15 states that rely on it in terms of river traffic, which again explains why they try and control it, because if you let things flood, then you can't control flood. Whereas if you can just put a shotgun line through something, and basically the sediment backs up the river or sets it out here. And this is all the sediment from the Mississippi coming here, whereas it previously used to kind of wash across the delta there. Anyway, I'll just head into New Orleans. So these particular, just for speed basically, the darker is the flood depth. So New Orleans itself, I'm sure everybody kind of might have a bit of knowledge about this, but basically it originally lined along the river, and then it sort of started to develop back into Lake Pontchartrain. The issue was that they set up all the pump systems to work for this particular development, but they didn't actually move the pump systems. But as the community expanded, they didn't move their pump and canal systems back further up, like in terms of being able to kind of protect this area. So this is obviously on the higher point of in terms of topography. The Ninth Ward, I think, is in here somewhere, which is where I spent a fair bit of my time when I was there. What's this one? Yeah, so the red in this particular map is the area that, so they've had 15% return of residents in this particular area. And that's sort of, and then between 50 and 60% in the yellow, and then greater than 60% in the green. So they're struggling. The problem is, everyone knows it's going to flood again. And so they're struggling to get people back there. In terms of, so these are homes from 1 to 200 years prior. It's funny because the history of New Orleans was that the original establishment of New Orleans was actually delayed by about 2 years due to a flood originally. So they kind of knew what they were getting into, but at the time they didn't have the amount of subsidence that they are now having because they weren't controlling the river as well. So when these houses were built, they were actually above sea level, and then they stepped it up, which made perfect sense. But due to subsidence, the fact that the river's not able to actually bring sediment into that area, the whole city has actually dropped significantly. I think it's dropped by about 2 metres over the last 100 years or something like that. So these are, even though they're built up, they're actually still below sea level. So you're getting these sorts of things happening. A lot of homes are still derelict. I was to meet with the head of NORA, which is the New Orleans Reconstruction Authority. He said he'd been to Brisbane and had learned a lot from the experience in Brisbane. I met David Wagner, who was heavily involved in the Dutch dialogues, who then helped me. He's an architect whose dad used to be one of the Democrat senators or whatever, and he's got a lot of political pull apparently in New Orleans. He helped me get a lot of the contacts in the Netherlands. I didn't know anybody, like, I just sort of scattergunned. I sent out 30 to 40 letters per country basically. And the people that contacted me were typically the ones who were most passionate, I found, about this kind of thing. And so that was really good because it meant that I only really ended up meeting the right kind of people. Like Jos van Alphen, for instance, the Delta Commissioner in the Netherlands. And he's the guy that actually makes a lot of decisions for that country in terms of this sort of thing. So anyway, I'll talk about him in a second. But these mansions used to sit on the ground and now they've raised them up. The levees are now 26 feet high in New Orleans and they're continuing to build them. They're spending billions and billions of dollars. You're getting these things. Now this is Byron Routon. He's like professor of architecture at Tulane University. The community rejected that and actually basically tried to stop the construction of that house because it was so foreign to as you can see. Apparently it's an abstraction of these ones, and I mean, other than maybe taking that line there and replicating it there, I don't really see how it's an abstraction anyway it is. But he only did one of them, planning on doing lots more, and because of the community outrage, it was actually stopped. The project was stopped. This is another one, Make It Right, that gets a lot of because it's Brad Pitt's foundation, and basically it's like an architectural theme park. It's a dream world for poor people, but they can't afford to actually live here. The houses cost around $600,000, and this is from NORA themselves, but they get subsidised down to about $150,000. I found that when I spoke to people who lived in them, there's like Frank Gehry houses. That's a Frank Gehry house there. Because people know that they're done by famous architects, they don't individualise. They don't. It's like a weird place. It's in the 9th Ward. The whole place was destroyed in Katrina, and basically they say they're flood homes because they either accord to the 8 feet rule or the 5 feet rule, which is basically the FEMA insurance sort of rule. You get a mortgage, you have to have insurance. In certain communities, because of that rule,